Welcome to Mom and Mind, a podcast about maternal mental health from conception, pregnancy, to birth and postpartum. Real stories from moms and family members who've made it from struggling to wellness, and interviews with experts and advocates who work for moms and families to get the help they need. We discuss very real struggles that can sometimes be hard to hear, but these are stories that need to be told so that moms and families can know that healing is possible. This podcast is meant to offer information and awareness and is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Thank you for being with us today. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In this episode, we are talking with Stacey Porter. She is the president and founder of the Tangerine Owl Project, but she is coming on today to share her experience. I was specifically looking for parents to talk about any medical challenges that came up during pregnancy or postpartum that they had to deal with and how that might have impacted their mental health. And Stacey was graciously open to sharing her experience. She's going to be telling us and walking us through the details of her pregnancy, where she experienced preeclampsia, and she'll tell us a little bit about what that is and what that means. And then the birth of her daughter at 25 weeks because of that condition, and then what happened afterwards, and the loss of her daughter while in the NICU. It's a difficult experience, but also one that I know that a lot of people go through, whether you can identify with all of her story or some of it. Once again, it's so important for us to hear these stories so that we know that we're not alone. And it looks different for everybody, but Stacey's willingness to share her experience hopefully gives somebody out there some comfort. And if not that, just a good education on what things can look like and how to be supportive. Stacey's been dedicated to efforts centering around supporting families who have suffered infant loss and traumatic birth since 2013. As I stated, she's the founder of the Tangerine Owl Project, a nonprofit devoted to offering peer support to these families, started in memory of her daughter after the NICU loss in 2012. Stacey is heavily invested in efforts to support maternal mental health as it intertwines so greatly with traumatic birth and bereavement experiences for these families. She's a contractor with 2020 Mom Project, leading their volunteer program, social media, and a handful of other objects. She sits on the board of directors for a local nonprofit, Beyond the Baby Blues, which offers support for women suffering from perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and serves on the bereavement committee for the Mother's Milk Bank of the Western Great Lakes. She's a member of the National Perinatal Association and Preemie Parent Alliance, and has collaborated on projects for patient education, including online curriculum for staff on psychosocial support for NICU parents. Once again, I'm so honored to have Stacey on with us. Let's hear from her. Welcome, Stacey. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to kind of put a call out for people who are willing to talk about their stories, and you responded. And I'm so grateful that you're willing and open to come on and share your experience so that others can, number one, not feel alone, and also kind of hear what to look out for in their own experiences, or at least what to, like you were saying before we chatted, not to be blindsided by. That sometimes really, really difficult things happen, and then also people heal from them, which is amazing. So please start wherever you'd like with your story.
Sure. Well, I think as kind of some subtext, I was pregnant with our third child, and this was in 2012. And my previous two pregnancies, I had no complications at all. I had picture-perfect pregnancies, really not even morning sickness, which is amazing to some people, but they seem to be kind of built for childbearing, which is kind of funny. But I had a boy and a girl. And then with my third pregnancy, I had seen the same provider and kind of expecting the status quo. We were in the same area. And it was very much just a completely different and life-altering experience. I was about halfway through my pregnancy, 24 weeks along, when I went in for a normal OB check-in, and everything looked relatively fine. There's nothing that caused alarm for my midwife. So at the end, she said, well, any questions, comments, concerns, anything? And I said, no, not really. I said, I feel pretty good. I said, my ankles are swollen, but that's really about it. And I had worked in hotels at the time, so I was on my feet a lot, and I kind of really just attributed it to that. And thank goodness she had said, oh, let's take a look, and I put my feet up and she was like,
Mm.
I hadn't remembered my ankles getting that swollen that early.
Uh-huh.
So that little comment and the way that my provider was able to catch that and really take it to heart and look further is really amazing to me, because some don't.
Right.
So otherwise I would have just gone back, I would have gone back and had been operating just as normal, and things could have gone significantly worse. I mean, So she ended up looking at my feet. She saw that they were swollen, probably beyond where they needed to be. She decided to do a test of my urine and found that I was spilling protein. So she had then concluded what she had thought, which was that I was preeclamptic, which really was I guess it was more of a process. I think that was in her head. She wanted to confirm not only that there was protein in the urine, because that's not always the case in preeclampsia, which I know sounds funny because they've changed the dialogue about that condition in recent. That was a fact. They didn't know how far the condition had progressed. So at that point, she asked me to do a 24-hour urine collection, which was super fun, let me tell you.
Sure. Yeah.
You can imagine being like, I have to go store my urine now.
Yeah. That's rough.
And at work, of all places. But anyhow, so I went on to do that, and my levels came back at a high level. They really like, if I remember correctly, they like for levels to be under 300. And my first test came back at something like 750. So they already doubled. And at that point, she had said, I want to watch you. I want to admit you to the hospital just to kind of keep an eye on things. So I did that. And within the next day, they had me do another collection from the day I was admitted to the next day, and they had doubled or tripled again. It was, it was really rapidly progressing.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where the day after that, I was at 3,500. So we're talking the span of, Monday was my appointment date, and Friday was the day that they said, look, we're going to transfer you down to a hospital that's more equipped to handle. I'm certain that they knew what was coming. So to handle the earlier deliveries. And, again, my baby was only 25 weeks at that point. So I got transferred down there, and I was monitored. I guess my hospital experience was an hour and a half away from home. So I went on a nice little ambulance ride, and once I got admitted, it was not very long from there where it's still continuing to decline. And I think by that point,
Sorry, can I ask you, up until this point, did you have anybody with you? Were you able to have a family member or anybody nearby?
I did have my husband. He was able to meet me at the first hospital at my home locale. So when I was getting admitted, the call came at like 5 minutes after I'd walked in the door for a normal day of work, the first time when she said, oh, hey, we want to admit you. So I called him immediately, and he was with me through the process. But and then I called my parents when everything was happening, but I didn't really want them to come down. It was at that point like a 3-hour drive for them, and his parents were in another state. So we were keeping them, posted on everything, but not yet doing anything. Once they decided to transfer me I was living in Champaign, which is, central Illinois. Once they decided to transfer me down to Peoria, then I called my parents, and they met me there at that hospital. And of course, my husband was following behind in the car, following the ambulance. So my parents met me at the hospital there.
Okay.
So I did definitely have support. At that time, my other 2 children were ages 3 and 4. So they were in preschool, and we had called on my husband's parents to come and get them and, just kind of figure out what we were doing as things went along. But, so Saturday was the day that I was transferred, and I arrived there like 3:00 in the afternoon or so. And at 7, I remember getting a visit from the doctors, and they were like, well, we don't really like the way this is going. We'll keep an eye on it for a little bit, but, kind of just be prepared sort of thing. And by, that was the initial talk at 7. Around 10 or 10:30, the doctor came in and said, look, actually I didn't know what sex the baby was, because he came in and the doctor said, well, baby is showing decelerations. And I'm not really confident in the way that, things are going. So they gave me the choice at that point to either keep baby in utero as long as possible, or to, and when it was going to go bad, it was going to go bad, and they would have to do whatever they needed to do. Or they said we can kind of control it a little bit by scheduling a C-section tonight. And I was like, oh my God, we're not ready. We don't have anything. I don't even, just kind of that whole shift really, you're trying to focus on what the outcomes are. And I asked the neonatologist at that point, what's the chances of living if we deliver this early? And they said 40%. And it was such a hard thing to think about. And then I guess the thing that really helped to influence the decision, we did go ahead and schedule the C-section, was that the doctors who were watching, the everything had kind of said, well, even if we let this go and let baby stay in utero, I don't think that things are going to wait long enough to really make a significant difference in the outcome.
So if I can, just for a moment, kind of for people who are listening, give them a context of what is preeclampsia, what is it doing to your body, and what are the risks to your child?
Sure. So preeclampsia is a condition that can affect any woman, and it can happen at any time during the pregnancy, including postpartum. So that's an important thing to note too. But what it does with the women's systems, typically what you'll see is a really high rise, a dangerous high level of blood pressure. And that, of course, causes problems for baby because baby's not getting enough oxygen. There can be things that happen with the placenta that are related. It's understood to some point, but it's also kind of, it doesn't happen the same way for everybody. And there are a number of risk factors. For some women, it can cause problems with vision. And once it causes seizures, I believe it gets classified then as eclampsia. But that's because of the pressure that it puts on the heart and the cardiac. I mean, there's lots of things that can go wrong.
So it's a kind of starting with the high blood pressure. You said from earlier, you said there's protein in the urine.
Yep, protein in the urine.
And there are some risk factors, but it could be random.
Correct. Yeah. And really what's surprising when I looked back at it, I didn't have any of the risk factors that you see typically for this stuff. So I can name some of those. People seem to be more at risk if it's their first pregnancy, if they're with a different partner than previous pregnancies, if they smoke, if they're of what they call advanced maternal age, so age 35 or more. I know those were some of the major factors, and I didn't have any of them. It was not. So that's even that just goes to show you it doesn't matter. Preeclampsia is a non-discriminatory condition is what I call it, because it affects every race, every age. It doesn't matter how many kids you have, where you live. Certainly those things play a factor into it, but it's really not definitive in who's going to get it and when they're going to get it. I hear a lot of stories about women who have developed it later in pregnancy. So sometimes it can be mild and it doesn't affect women to the point that, they need to deliver early. Sometimes bed rest is okay. There's a historical misconception that it was a problem with the placenta and delivering the child solves it. And that's not the case.
Right.
So
Oh, right. So you were saying in your experience, you said there were decelerations. That means the heart rate for your child was decreasing, and that was part of their concern.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So that's part of the risks to the child.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because what happens, I feel like there's restriction between the things that are flowing through the umbilical cord and the placenta, and baby's not getting enough of everything that they need.
Okay. So in your experience, I'm not sure if you knew about all of this before you went through this or not.
I didn't. I had heard the word a few times, but I didn't have much knowledge of it. And the stuff came, looking into it was, after it happens to you, you're like, oh, why did this happen?
Right.
After the fact, I became a volunteer for the Preeclampsia Foundation, and I had done some patient advocacy work for them for several years after I lost my daughter. So yeah, the stuff you learn is amazing, but I think, they're still trying to figure it out. There's lots of things they know. There's lots of things they don't know.
Right.
So they did let's see. I guess maybe I should go back to the story. So,
right. If I can ask, you're in the hospital, you have to decide what you're going to do. C-section, there's risks there. Keep the baby in, and there are risks there as well on some level, but you don't know very much at this point about what all of this is and how it's affecting you or the baby. So you're just needing to make a decision.
Yeah. All my medical care providers were really good about giving the basics. Like, so they would say, hey, they used the word preeclampsia. They told me what it meant. They showed me that my blood pressures were high, and they said, they kept it in relatively simple terms, which I think is helpful when a mother is experiencing, somewhat traumatic or crisis time, because you just can't process a ton of information.
Sure. Yeah.
But I didn't have the actual background on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, sometimes women get caught up in, well, what did my body do?
Mm-hmm.
How did it work against me? And that's all stuff that kind of came later. But yeah, I mean, they were good at keeping me informed. And
sure. Yeah.
Because, I had to make that decision with my husband, and we kind of talked about it. And when the doctor said it really isn't going to make much difference, I thought, well, let's at least have some control over this then, because it made more sense to me than trying to stick around and, who knows what would happen from then.
Right.
So they scheduled me for a C-section that evening, and I had never had a C-section before either. I had never had an epidural. I had IV medications with my other two just to kind of control the pain, but yeah, it was all new experience. So I do remember feeling like, once I had the epidural, and it was like, oh, why didn't I do this before? Like, this was so
right.
good. But I think it was still kind of scary because they had given the injections to help develop the baby's lungs. Again, I think the medical professionals, they all knew what was coming and where it was going. They just didn't know how fast, I think, it was not the if, when.
Yeah.
And you get 2 shots to develop the baby's lungs. Once before I left the original hospital, and then again once I got to the other hospital. So they were taking precautions. They knew it was coming to give baby best chance of survival. The C-section went just fine. No, I didn't have any complications there. I remember getting, the magnesium sulfate, and I know sometimes that makes people really sick. I remember I didn't get sick. I got flushed, but that was about it. I felt really warm. But after that, it was kind of like, I was, I guess, in the operating room, and I don't remember them ever telling me what I had. And I don't know that they had even known that I hadn't known the sex of the baby. So I remember asking a nurse, I'm like, they were like, oh, everything's great. Baby's good. We're going to take baby to the NICU. Your husband's going to go, with, and I was like, okay, great. And then I went, can somebody tell me what I had?
Oh boy.
And they're like, oh, of course. And they kind of laughed. They said, you had a beautiful baby girl. And I was like, oh, great. And I got to see her very, very briefly she wasn't in the isolette yet, but the transport. So I got to see her really, really shortly. But other than that, then they were going back to work on, sewing me up and everything. And then I was put into recovery. So I didn't get to really have much contact with her in any way. And I know they also, I think there's a general procedural thing where women have had the mag sulfate, like they're not supposed to go into the NICUs. I don't recall exactly why that is now, but I remember being like, I just wanted to see her after that. Right. And it was kind of like I begged and pleaded, and finally they were like, well, you can go for a few minutes. Like my husband wheeled me down there because I was still at that point in mother baby unit and delivery unit.
Sure.
And so she was down in the NICU, which is on a different floor. So I did get to go see her for a short time. And then they ended up transferring. So I got discharged and they transferred her to the NICU, and their NICU there was private rooms. So I basically camped out at the hospital for the whole time she was there, which was 27 days. We went through a lot of ups and downs in the NICU, as most parents do, with something would kind of look off and then it would be resolved the next day. And sometimes she had a number of transfusions that happened. I was present in the room for all of the rounds, which was, really helpful. I think for me, they took time, the doctors and everybody who was involved in rounds as that collaborative team took the time to answer any questions,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
pretty rare to have private rooms also.
Yeah, it is. I know there's controversy out there, or I guess not controversy, more so like just the different perspectives of what's beneficial and what's not to the neonate and to the mother. I really liked it because I felt like I was able to, I just like being in there all the time. And I think when there's so much going on with all the machines, if you're putting yourself into a setting where it's a multi-bed unit, it makes it easier for the staff to be able to care for your child, but it's not super conducive to kind of anything else. I mean, it's my personal view. So yeah, they had a name on the door, and they had, we could kind of sort of like decorate the room a little bit. My other two kids made drawings for her that we put up, and it was really cute. And they had volunteers who make little hats that came around, and so they brought that. And the entire experience, I think I felt very supported through all aspects, through the communication that was happening. They had, this particular hospital had someone on staff who was there just to be a resource for the families. So she would check in, and when the kids came to visit, which was not super often because they were at home and trying to keep to a regular schedule, but when they did come to see her, when they weren't in the room, she brought them puzzles, and it was just really good. Everything was a really good experience. So
I'm assuming then, that, just to backtrack a little bit, that after the C-section, then that your preeclampsia resolved, or you were relatively okay at this point?
Yeah, for the most part. I did need to be put on blood pressure medication for a short term. So I was on that for about, I would say probably 2 months postpartum. Okay. For some people, the effects of the blood pressure don't actually resolve all the way. So some people have to be on meds for a longer time period before it resolves. Some it doesn't resolve at all, and they just are, it depends on a lot of things. But yeah, for me, I was on labetalol, I believe it was. So I was taking that while I was in the hospital, and then afterwards. So yeah. Okay,
so then you were primarily staying in the NICU with your daughter, and then things were okay for a little while, and then what happened?
Yeah, so one of the things, and this will come into play later, so I want to kind of give some focus to, so I was there all the time. I didn't want to leave because it was too far away in case something happened, and I was just in that mindset where, I would go down to the cafeteria, yes, but I didn't want to leave the hospital. And after, a couple weeks, it probably been about 3 weeks. And, my husband and my kids were back to normal schedule. Both our parents had spent a week with the kids, taking care of them. It was very much like I hadn't been home, and they were all kind of like, hey, why don't you take a break? Even the nurses were like, why don't you go home, go visit, see your family, see your husband, see the kids. And I was like, I finally decided to do that. And when I went home, I checked in every day, and she was doing okay. The nurses would give me updates, and I felt okay about that. And then I came back. So I went from a Friday to a Sunday, came back, and on that Tuesday following, she had developed actually, I guess before I get to that, I can backtrack it. I had noticed that she had become lethargic. Preemies are small and mighty and very much, very active, very feisty. I think they get the reputation for her. And so, she was normally like that. And what they would say is, she's really doing pretty well. She just has to eat and grow. My neonatologist had said, she keeps going like this, we'll be able to talk about, another 2 weeks, we'll be able to talk about transfer back to your hometown. And, I know that anybody who is in the NICU is very cautious with the words they use and what they imply and what they say, because false hope is not, something they really want to give to parents. So I knew that meant she was doing well. We watched her oxygen levels on the stats kit. They were reducing it because she was able to breathe, relatively well on her own. So the amount of oxygen they had to provide to her was decreasing, which is good. I mean, of course, you have the ups and downs. So sometimes they would have to make it higher, but she would recover. She was taking my breast milk. So it did have to be fed through a tube, but I had been pumping, and we were storing milk. And so when she was able to have nutrients that weren't, just from a solution, they would always give her my milk, and she was taking it just fine. So that was a good sign, right? Everything kind of pointed to, well, hey, we're cautiously optimistic. Things are going well in the right direction. So that was part of what allowed me to kind of feel like it was okay to go home.
Can I get a sense, like, throughout this period of time, what was your mental state? Like, how were you doing?
I feel like I was okay. It had kind of just become routine, right? Because I was there. So I would get up in the morning. I would sleep in the room for the most part. They had like a couch or whatever you want to call it that you could crash on. At the beginning, my husband would stay in one of the rooms that they made available to parents who asked for it as long as they could accommodate. So I was okay. I mean, I think I was confident in what I was seeing, and I tried to just adjust to, well, what should I do now? I was keeping in contact with family and friends who were inquiring. I was talking to her. I was interacting with her as much as I could and asking about kangaroo care. And so I was okay. It was somewhat stressful, but I didn't really see the mental health implications till later on, to be perfectly honest.
All right. Okay. So kind of back into the story, she started to not do well. She was lethargic and then...
I came back, and I noticed that she was lethargic. So I said something to the doctor. I was like, hey, she doesn't seem to be as, moving around as much today. And they're like, oh yeah, let's take a look. And then they found that she had an infection, which, again, is not uncommon. Preemies get lots of different things that may or may not get resolved. But this one ended up being, it was a hospital-acquired bacteria. And, obviously we don't really know how she got it or where or why, but she started to become septic. So at that point, when I noticed the lethargy, it was because, the stuff had started moving into her bloodstream. And Pseudomonas was the bacteria. It's really aggressive. The doctors explained that they tried several different courses of antibiotics from, broad spectrum to the heavy hitters, anything that they could. I think at that point she still had to have another transfusion or two. For some reason, they were looking for perforations in her intestines because they could see something, but they couldn't tell where it was. So even like the neonatal surgeon had looked at her x-rays and they're just like, they couldn't find the obvious where it was. And sometimes they're so tiny that you just...
Would this be something that she was born with, or was it a cause of the bacteria?
No, she wasn't born with it. The infection was developed from bacteria that was introduced to her somewhere in the hospital. So we don't know.
The perforations that you were describing.
The perforations. No, I don't think she was born with it because she wasn't showing that before. I'm not exactly sure, why. But yeah, at some point it seemed like the bacteria then had gotten into the bloodstream somehow. So the infection got worse. She was just really, really sick. And, the way they explained it to me was that they, kind of what they say is they tried everything. They were going to look at if antibiotics were working, if transfusions were helping, and they couldn't get control of the infection. Yeah. Because the particular one that she had is really, really aggressive. And so...
Pseudomonas.
Correct. Yeah. And so, and especially babies, her size, that she was born at 1 pound, 5 ounces. So, her weight kind of fluctuated a little bit based on how much she was able to take in as far as nutrition. And if they had to give her antibiotics, then they stopped the feedings and they just do the Nutriol. So yeah, it was not good. So they had kind of prepared us for the worst. And at that point, I would say is where everything changed. I tend to be a relatively optimistic person. So I think up until that point, you kind of go with the flow. There's ups and downs. I tried not to jump to conclusions. But once that was the case and they were really looking at, there was nothing else they could do, that really made the maternal guilt come in. I felt like I left her, and this is why it happened. This is why she got sick, because I left, and of course that's not true. I always say that the heart is different from the head. You can know something in your head and it doesn't matter because you still feel responsible. So she was sick for 3 days and then she ended up passing away. We did get to spend time with her. We did get to hold her. They took out all the tubes on the day. Actually, my husband and I made the decision to take her off the supportive systems. So in that respect, I think it was helpful because we were able to bring everybody to the hospital. We had the godparents there. We had my parents and my husband's parents, and our pastor came in and did a baptism. I'm not super spiritual, but we had interaction with her kind of as a family unit and prior to all of this happening. So it was helpful for her to be there. But yeah, we were able to do the things we needed to do to get a little bit of closure. And then my husband and I spent the last moments of her life with her and with the nurse. And, of course, the doctor has to call the time of death. So they did have to do that eventually after they gave us some space with her. But yeah, it was really difficult.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you.
It's a lot to go through. I mean, this is, you're describing several months worth of, from your condition to the birth and to like the ups and downs in the NICU and then dealing with this and then, after effects for a while. Correct. I'm sure that is quite a lot to deal with. And it's a lot. I appreciate you speaking to the maternal guilt part because as you were talking about it, I was thinking, gosh, there's so many moms who do take that on and fathers, families who take that on as when there's any kind of difficulty or loss is, well, what I should have done X, Y, or Z. Or
I should have,
looking through all of the moments where you feel like you could have or should have done something different to change the outcome. And it's, part of this feeling so out of your control to be able to do stuff. It makes sense to look for those things. But man, is that a heavy burden? Yeah.
I spent a lot of time, I think I know a lot about grief and how it processes. I was a human development major. My life course kind of changed after that and I went into a different field. But, when I came back to this, it all makes sense, but it still doesn't make it feel any better.
No, right. Is your experience and kind of moving through the grief and all that you went through prompted you to start your work?
Yes, because I had felt like, although we had support at the hospital, I didn't really feel like there was a lot of peer support out there for people who had gone through this, through infant loss. And I think the only things I knew about were like support groups. And I really wasn't a support group kind of person. It was not going to bring me comfort. So, but what I did find is while I was in there, and especially right after she died, I got a Facebook message from an acquaintance, a mutual friend of someone who I worked with on I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't a colleague who was there every day. It was like a regional manager for a hotel. And they were following, I was very open about everything that was going on Facebook because I felt like that was where a lot of people who knew us could kind of follow along because they weren't there locally. So this woman had emailed me and she said, I've been following your story. I'm a friend of so-and-so. I just wanted to let you know, I'm so sorry. Number one, I'm so sorry for your loss. Number two, I lost my daughter as well in December. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here. And, we connected through there and that was my lifeline.
Yeah.
I felt like nobody, my friends and family hadn't really experienced this at all. So it wasn't that they weren't being sympathetic. It just, they didn't understand. And I think a lot of others feel that way.
Sure. And I'll add to that too. A lot of people don't know what to say and don't know what to do. And I think also tend to just stay back a little bit because it's awkward for them to, but it can feel really isolating, right? People just kind of like disappear or are not showing up for you in ways that you might need or had hoped.
Right. And I think I didn't even know what I needed at that point. It was very much like I was in such crisis mode that I kind of, like I said, she was my lifeline and I would call her and it felt really good to be able just to like, you don't have to explain the whole story. You don't have to explain how you're feeling. She just knew. And that is what I felt was lacking for other people after I looked at everything. Because, we don't want to talk about the sad things and the things that go wrong. But then once something like that happens, and I think we see this a lot in not only infant loss, but pregnancy loss in general, people come out of the woodwork and say, oh, I had this happen. I had this happen.
Oh, right.
But not until it's brought up. So, I worked my way through the grief by using her as just my, I needed her to stand. And it was more so like just we would talk and I would, sometimes I would just cry on the phone to her. And I think another thing that's important is people, when you want to help someone who's going through this, our tendency as a society and what we've been taught is to try to fix it for them.
Right.
And it's really uncomfortable, but accepting the fact that you can't fix this and not trying to, is the hardest thing I think for people to do, because they want to do something, but
Sure. They feel helpless and,
Exactly. So,
wow. Yeah. So through the organization that you've founded, the Tangerine Owl Project, this was kind of inspired through your experience. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely it was. Yeah. People ask me where I got the name from, and I'm like, oh, well, I relate it back to my daughter, Delilah. I said she was, in a couple different ways, right? So the tangerine is because she was not a pale pink kind of girl. She was coming to the world, and it was with a bang, and all the stuff that we had to go through, and she didn't do anything small. So I couldn't relate that to that pale pink. And I went, I got to find something. And I wanted to, when she was first in the hospital, we didn't have anything. We were only halfway through the pregnancy. We didn't, I wasn't ready and prepared, didn't have much for her. And I wanted to get her something. So as I was sitting there in the NICU, I was like, I can get her a blanket. I can get her the silky thing, because both my other kids really liked them. And it's, if you've ever, seen or heard the silkies, the security blankets, they've got one side that's super soft and one side that's like a satiny. And so I custom made, I didn't make it myself, but I ordered one that was custom for her. And so I picked that tangerine color because it was very vibrant and pretty. And then the owls were on the other side. And I was like, it reminded me of her, because when they're so small like that 1 pound, 5 ounces, their eyes. And if you've ever seen preemies, like their eyes are just so big in relation to the rest of their bodies. So I also attribute the wide-eyed owl in terms of knowledge and teaching, right? So owls are thought to be as wise, and it stood out to me as something that it doesn't make sense when you say the Tangerine Owl Project. It doesn't speak to anything that we do. However, it has deep meaning for myself and, the attribution to my daughter. So,
right.
Yeah, that was.
Well, that's beautiful. You're connected. This is your organization, and you're connected to it in a really powerful way.
Yep.
That's outstanding. And really, it sounds like, from the bio and stuff that you're doing, you're really in this world and kind of helping other families in a meaningful, tangible way.
I am. Yeah. I feel, when I started the project, it was to be able to offer one-on-one peer support, simply be that mom who listens and can sit with them in the dark and, either figuratively or literally, depending on the case. And I really have, I think from the feedback I've gotten from the mothers I've worked with, it's so comforting to them to have someone who knows, because they don't have to tell their story 50 times, and they don't have to, like I said, you kind of just get it. So that was what I aimed to provide. It has, as far as what I want to do with the project, it has grown, where I want to go with it has grown exponentially. I've learned a ton about the world of maternal mental health, and I thought I had dealt really well. I started the project a year after my daughter's death, and I did it on her birthday because I knew it was going to be a hard day. So I was like, let's make something positive, right? Nice, yeah. I couldn't stand the thought of her existence just kind of being done, I guess.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, talk about meaning making. And I started this organization, and I thought, all right, I'm coping with this really well. Like I got, we moved, and I'd gone back to, caring for our children, and you go through the initial grief period and you kind of wall off everybody, and you just do the bare minimum, make sure they're clothed and fed and have a house, but not much more emotionally speaking. So that took a little while to get through, but I had felt like I was doing really, really well. And I was like, look, I started this project, and it was cathartic for me, definitely not altruistic. But then I found, a couple of years later, I actually, and this is where the mental health aspect gets in. A couple of years later, I was at another job, and I started having a lot of anxiety and depression, panic attacks, and I didn't know where they were coming from, because it wasn't anything that was a logical connector to what I was doing in my work life versus, it wasn't happening when I was doing things for Tangerine Owl. I was working a regular full-time job in the hotel industry, and it started to really build up. It caused me a lot of mental health issues, and I just couldn't understand where it was coming from. And so I went to a therapist, and I had to get on, medication, antidepressants, and I got some anti-anxiety meds. it's surprising because my therapist had said, do you think this is related to your daughter? And I was like, well, no, like I'm doing fine with that. I don't, it doesn't cause me trauma to think about her. And I was open with everybody. I shared her story a lot. I did, the stuff with the project. We always talked to our kids about her. So when they would be upset, we made sure to instill that, I think, so that people are allowed to talk about their feelings. And it floored me because I couldn't understand why this stuff was coming out so much later. I mean, this is 4 years after the fact. We had done a memorial for her. We had, everything that you kind of think help to give comfort and to give closure to the traumatic experience that you have. I felt like I had done that. So it was like, well, why? I went to therapy when we were in our previous hometown. And then I also went to therapy once we moved. So you
were doing all of the things that you could possibly do to, right?
Exactly. So I was like, why, and it wasn't like I put it away, right? I didn't stop dealing with it. It doesn't seem like I did. So yeah, when all this stuff started happening, I was like, it really was shocking.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's true for some people. There can be delayed responses or delayed onset of feelings and symptoms. But I'm glad you're speaking to it because your whole experience, I'm sure that the listeners can identify with parts or all of what you're describing. And I think the more, that you've given quite a few details about your experience, which helps other people to be able to identify too, not unsimilar to what you did with the Tangerine Project is really, reaching out to people and holding space.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you doing that with your story and your experience. And it sounds like obviously you went through so much and then to several years later have to be dealing with, oh my gosh, here are all of these feelings. And it's a lot. It's a lot to handle, but normalizing it for other people like you're doing by sharing with us is so important.
Yes.
I hear so often from people, it feels like it's just me or what's wrong with me. I'm sure nobody else has ever had this feeling or felt it in this way. And I mean, basically my sense is that if you have a feeling, somebody else has had it too.
Else has it. Yeah. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, I said, when I talk to people who are working with me and any front, it's like, if you've done it, if you feel it, I get it. And so if you want to call and yell at me, even though it's not like, that's fine. If you want to call and cry, if you want to talk to me, and it's anything that you have, I've probably felt it. And if I haven't, I know women who have. So it's,
right.
It's vital to explore that. And I think the more and more that I learn, again, a really big advocate now for maternal mental health, the more that I've learned about the processes that happen for women after loss. And then in general, just talking through pregnancy and prenatal and postnatal care, just everything that I've learned cements the fact that we aren't doing enough for our mothers, and we're not, it's all about the baby. It's not about the moms. And
right.
Yeah. So that's kind of what normalizing all of that stuff from, I didn't ever suffer from postpartum depression or anxiety stuff prenatally or postnatally, really. Like when you look at that cutoff, like anytime within the year after, I didn't have those things. So, but I certainly did get all of these things following the loss. So I can relate to the women who are going through that. And
it's great. I mean, for you to share that, thank you. Because, so many people are confused by when they have feelings that don't come up when those windows are supposedly closed or when it feels like they should have felt it at some other point. It can feel confusing, but really it can come. It comes when it comes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience and the work that you're doing now. I know you're involved in quite a few organizations, both nationally and in your community, and it's so needed and so necessary. And thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to actually share again and to let women know that it's okay to find somebody who will listen. And sometimes that's not your close supportive people because they just don't know how to handle it. But, anybody who can help mend that for you or with you, I guess, walk the road with you is going to be a benefit. So hold on to those people tight and seek them out and let them help you. Take away because you can't do it on your own. Even though we're very strong women, all of us are really strong. I think it takes at least one other person, if not a community, to really I look at you have all the support in the world and you still end up with issues like me, right? I never felt like I wasn't supported, and it still hit me. So that's an important thing to remember.
Well, thank you so much, Stacey.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you again, Stacey, for sharing your experience with us. And for those of you who did identify with parts of her story or parts that were difficult for you to hear, just take a little extra care of yourself today, as it can be difficult sometimes to hear other people's experiences if they're close to yours. If you'd like to get in touch with Stacey or learn more about the work that she's doing, go to tangerineowl.org and connect with her on Facebook at Tangerine Owl Project. As usual, please do connect with us. Subscribe, download our episodes so you don't miss any, and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. If you'd like to dig a little deeper and have some conversations with us, find us at the Mom and Mind Connection Facebook group. Until next time. By joining us today, you are part of the growing community of people who are aware and concerned for mothers and families during this beautiful and sometimes very difficult time of life. If you or someone you know is having a hard time, help is available. You can feel better. Please look for resources for help at momandmind.com. Together, we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Thank you for listening and being a part of the Mom and Mind community.